Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're looking at the first submission by Myra of the horse Bunny. Now, Bunny's a 7-year-old that unfortunately got off to a very bad start in training, and that she was sent to a trainer who flipped the horse over in long reins. And the horse, she said, was actually paralyzed for 3 days and got over that, and she was able to bring the horse home and rest it for a year. And then try to start training again, but the horse has become very fractious and was throwing people off, throwing her off, throwing off a trainer. She sent it to another trainer, says for 11 weeks. And it was doing pretty good, and then brought it back, and it was throwing people off again. So the first thing to realize is that a horse like this has had a big emotional shock. Flipping over and being paralyzed and all the things that's happened to it is going to make everything quite difficult. And actually, mental trauma, just like with people, can be much harder to get over than physical trauma. So just know that it's going to take you a while. But I think you're on the right track here. And the thing to remember is, with a horse like this, you've just got to go back. Because of what happened to her, she says she was very difficult to lunge. So you just have to realize that that's all you can do until you get the horse lunging and stretching, and it's going to take some time. Always understanding that even with a horse that doesn't have an emotional problem, it takes 2 years to bring a horse, mind to the point where it's been consistent long enough that the training kind of overrides whatever sort of natural fears the horse might have, or trepidation about his surroundings or being ridden or whatever the case may be. So just know that really you're doing the best thing here, and just don't even think about getting back on this horse and riding it until it is really, really consistent on the lunge line and really stretching into that contact, and you see the horse really getting into the zone. In other words, the horse has to really just do this long enough to forget about what's happening, what has happened to it, and forget about the fact that it has learned to throw people off. Of course, that's the worst thing about people getting on young horses that don't know what they're doing. Most of the time when a young horse unloads somebody, it was by accident the first time. But once they realize that, they spook once and somebody falls off, then all of a sudden they start spooking all the time. Because remember, in a horse's mind, this is a game that we're playing, that we get them to allow us to do this. But if they find out they don't have to, as in the case of learning how to get rid of somebody, that can be a real problem. And you really just have to go back and start all over again, just as you've done with this one. This is like a beautiful horse and has a lot of potential, as long as you can just get her over the problems. And I have worked many of horses through this same kind of problem. Just know that it will take a little bit of time, but it really won't take that much more time if you just think in terms of what it should have taken to begin with to get a young horse ready. We want to spend a lot of time doing this groundwork, a lot of less time up on their backs, and not putting them in situations where they're going to become difficult. And one of the reasons that, while I am quite good at long reining horses, and I've even done an expose on long reining horses on the website, it's really not something that I recommend for a lot of people to try doing on their own unless they're under supervision and of somebody who really knows what they're doing and can take that very carefully through that work, because it's very easy to get tied up in the lines if you don't know what you're doing, and very easy to create a lot of problems, as is what happened with this horse. So for me, I would never put horses into long reins until they're really accepting the contact with the bridle, working well over their backs. And then it isn't even something that I do all that much. A lot of people long line because they feel they can get the horse to engage more. Because what happens when we first start long riding the horse, just like with the Nelson Pessoa rigs that go around the butt of the horse, the rope scares the horse forward. And so the horse gets very active until it forgets about that rope, which is what the problem with the Nelson Pessoa rigs are. When you first put them on, the rope around the hindquarters scares the horse a bit, and it runs forward away from those ropes. But once it gets used to it, it doesn't do anything at all, which is why I tell people, if you know how to lunge, you wouldn't need a Nelson Pessoa rig, and if you don't know how to lunge, you're only going to create more problems than you had to begin with if you don't know how to lunge correctly. And that's the same thing true of long reining as well. So you really have to know what you're doing, and a horse should be pretty well advanced before they start into long reins. So what you're doing here is just the right thing to do with this horse. Just go back. And I love the work you're doing, work in hand. That's exactly what you want to do, which we'll see here in a few moments. And just what I recommend. If you have a horse that's been running around hollow for years and years, and especially one that's been lunged for long periods of time, where they're aerobically very fit and have gotten used to running around with their heads up in the air, horses can do that for a really long time. And so the best thing to do is to come back to the work in hand and actually teach them to stretch from the ground and to bend away from that inside leg. And then you go back to lunging and you find that you have a easier time. So what you're doing here is exactly what I would recommend for you to do, is go back and work the horse in hand, Get the horse stretching and moving away from the whip on the inside, which you can achieve much easier when you're alongside the horse there than sometimes people can do with a lunge line if they're not very good with a lunge whip, that is. And also why I tell people all the time that they need to practice with a lunge whip so that they really get ambidextrous with it with each hand and can place it where they need to on the horse at that exact moment. But the way you're going about this is just what you should do. And she's going to start this here in a few moments. Now what I would like you to do is go back and watch my videos on how to do this. What you should have is a dressage whip in your right hand to do this, which would give you more control over the horse's body, but you are getting good stretch. And so once again, that's the only thing that's important at this level of a horse's training. Until the horse gets over its back, the only thing that's important, the only thing we can work on is getting the horse over its back. Once it does, then everything is built from there. And everything becomes easy from there. For instance, bending a horse. Once a horse is over its back, it's easy to bend and bends very naturally. If a horse is hollow, it's very difficult to bend it, and you have to work very hard to try to do something that's actually impossible, which is why we see so many frustrated horses and riders these days. So what you're doing here is very, very, very good. So remembering what we're looking for is just the amount of time in your lesson that the horse spends working correctly. So if that means that all you do is this walk work for a while, there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Remembering, it's only important to get the horse working correctly each day in whatever gait we can. Not that we do a lot of exercise, in quotation mark, you know. They don't need to just run around hollow. That does no good. Actually, just like a car that's unbalanced takes tread off the tires, and that's not what we want to do. So right from the beginning of training, we want to emphasize this correct carriage and just get that happening every day. So this is really good. The only thing would be better with this if you can just get a dressage whip into your right hand that you can work with. Then you can get the horse moving away from your whip a little better, and that's of course what the working hand is for. But having said that, you're getting a pretty good stretch out of here the way you're going about doing this. So there's nothing wrong with that and exactly what you want to do. Running around a horse on a lunge line for an hour upside down does absolutely no good but wear the horse's legs out. And you see very often, you know, veterinarians are not wrong. Unfortunately, lunging started getting a bad rap because vets started telling people not to lunge their horses because they were damaging their horses, but the vets didn't know how to lunge correctly in order not to have that happen. So lunging is not bad for your horse. It's like riding is not bad for your horse, but bad lunging and bad riding are bad for your horse. So look at it that way. Really good stretch here. And once again, the beauty of the walk work is that you can do lots of it. You could easily just come out and spend an hour doing what you're doing right here. You know, if you yourself could stand to do it. And you look pretty fit. Doesn't look like you're having any problems there. So just know that that's the important thing, is we get the horse to carry itself in whatever gait we can get it to carry itself correctly in. And that's the gaits that we work the horse in. As we say, there's no point in cantering a hollow horse, for instance. If you get the horse working the horse back in the trot, in time it'll build the strength necessary to canter correctly. But if you canter incorrectly, it will destroy the horse's legs. Remember, the faster you go, the harder it is on the joints if the horse isn't working over its back. So really good work here, and just know that a horse like this, you know, you need to just think in terms of just spending nothing 6 months to a year before you even think about getting back on this horse. Until this horse is just so in the bridle and so in the contact and it's really started to develop beautifully and really started to get in the zone. Then you want to start thinking about getting back on this horse. You know, because every time, as you said, you sent it off to a trainer, you know, for 11 weeks, came pretty good back, and then the trainer came to ride the horse there and got dumped off of it. So, you know, once again, that just undid the 11 weeks of work that you just did. So just know that you need to spend quite a while with the horse before you ever get back on this horse again. It needs to be completely working over its back, completely working correctly in the shambone, and then ultimately in side reins, getting at the point where it really accepts contact and stretches into that contact and starts to get in the zone. And then from there, you'll be able to do everything else. But your work here in hand has been very, very good. Other than the fact that you're not carrying a whip in your hand, which you do need to do, you are getting a good stretch out of the horse. So once again, you're achieving the thing that is important, which is to get the horse to learn to stretch into the contact. Now see, right there is where you just need to have a little whip in your left hand that you just send the horse on a little bit with. We don't want to let the horse get in the habit of just deciding to scratch its nose every time that it wants to. That can become very habit forming after a while. So it's not to say you might let him scratch for a second and move on. I am not a big believer in being too strict about those kind of things, but you can't let something like that become a habit. But with a horse like this, it has to regain its trust. This horse, having gone through has just completely learned to distrust humans and what they're all about. So we have to go back and just regain this horse's trust, and in time, what a beautiful horse is going to be when you get there. So just know that that's really all the problem is. So just go back and don't even think about getting on this horse for a while. Just do nothing but the lunge work till you see that back really coming up. You see the horse really accepting correct contact with the bridle and really getting in the zone, so to speak. And then and only then do you want to think about getting back on this horse. In other words, the horse needs to have time to just forget about what's happened to it and just build up enough correct responses in his brain, so to speak. Remember, that's all what we're doing is teaching the horse to respond correctly to our aids and to respond without getting excited or to resist. And most horses will do that as long as we keep what we're doing within the realm of what they can do. But that's always what happens. So many people with young horses, they get on too soon and then they get dumped, just like what happened with you, or a horse has an accident like it did in the long range, which it probably shouldn't have been doing when it did it. And, once again, it's just like jumping horses. Most of the young horses, especially the ones bred these days, will jump very easily for a while. And it's very easy for people to just keep jacking up the fences because the horses seem like they have a pretty good attitude about it. But if you do that and the horse has an accident, it'll never jump again, or getting it to jump again will become very, very difficult. A horse that's had a lot of experience, if it has a little accident, it kind of gets over it because it has enough underlying education to override that. But if a horse falls through the middle of a fence and it's only been jumping for a few months, I guarantee you're going to have a very hard time making that horse into an honest jumper thereafter. So taking your time in the beginning, and just because you can do something with a horse doesn't mean that you should. How many young horses I have seen go out way too early and end up dumping people out in the field. I've seen them jump in front of cars with people, off of cliffs with people, you name it. Because they think the horse, he's nice and calm in the ring, let's go for a hack. Well, once again, a horse should be quite well in the A's before you decide to go out for a hack and you don't know what's coming. Because the horse can be very, very good in the ring and then go outside and find you have something entirely different because the horse really hasn't spent enough time building that confidence of control that comes from time and time and repeating the same thing. So it becomes automatic for the horse to respond to us. So what you're doing here is very good and exactly what I'd want you to do. If you can't get the horse to stretch within a reasonable amount of time on the lunge, you'd want to just immediately stop. If I can't get a horse to begin to stretch into the contact within, even 3 or 4 or 5 minutes at the most, I'm going to stop and do just what you're doing and work the horse in hand and begin to teach it from in hand how to stretch and what I'm asking for and how to move away from the leg, which would my whip in your right hand. And once again, that's the only problem I have with what you're doing here is you need to have a whip in your hand so that you have a leg. Right now, she's going along quite well, considering, but you really have no leg. So if something were to, create a difficulty that the horse wanted to concentrate on, you'd have no ability to bring the horse back forward into the aids again. But having said that, what you're doing here is really good. And this is going to be way more useful. 10 minutes of walking around like this is going to be way more useful than an hour of running around hollow on the lunge line. So, start her out every day. What I suggest, kind of let her loosen up for a minute. If she doesn't begin to stretch into the contact within a few moments, just stop and do just what you're doing here. Only add a whip to your outside hand. That'd be your right hand in this instant. The hand controlling the outside rein. And then go back to lunging again, day after day after day. And it won't be long before this horse begins to stretch into the contact. Which she's already doing here at the walk, which proves that she's quite capable of doing it. And if you just keep up the work, that you'll get there. So that was really good work in hand. This looks like a beautiful horse. I really look forward to seeing this one develop. Just take your time. Don't even think about getting on her, as I said, until this horse has gotten really consistent. I would think about, 6 months from now before you even think about getting back on this horse. And just concentrate on the groundwork, building her up, building her confidence, building her contact with the bit, and her level of concentration and ability to get in the zone, that is to totally relax, and then very slowly, and then only then go back to riding, but taking it very slowly, starting off only at a walk, only walking the horse. You don't need to do walk, trot, and canter the first day you get on a horse. You don't even need to walk. Sometimes we just get on them and stand there and then get off again. So you have to go back and build trust again in that way once you've got a really good foundation going. So great work with this horse. I really look forward to seeing what you do with it. It looks like a lot of potential. You've gone through a lot to get to where you are here, but I'm sure you can straighten this horse out and end up with something very beautiful. This is Will Faerber from Art to Ride. Keep up the good work.